Have you ever noticed a crack in your wall and you said to yourself, it's not big, so I'll just leave it. I won't look at it right now. Welcome, 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 everyone, to another episode of Finding Freedom Through Confidence, a space where, as you guess it, we always say confidence isn't something that you pick up from a supermarket shelf, it is an ever growing muscle. And so, this is the space where leaders, visionaries, high achievers come to be seen, to be heard, and to be reignited. If we haven't met as yet, I am your host, Tanique Easy, speaker, corporate trainer, and facilitator, empowerment, and life coach. And I help organizations unlock the power of their new frontline and mid level leaders and equip them with mindset, vision, and performance strategies to lead so that they can lead with power through my proprietary MVP framework. Again, this is another episode in the series of Leadership Unlocked. And today's conversation is one that is not just relevant. I believe it is very critical for every organization that depends on a strong middle leadership. And so they say that heavy is the head that wears the crown. And for mid level leaders, for new frontline leaders, that crown is not flashy, but it is heavy at times, and they feel the weight of that crown when they are in mid level leadership. I am going to be sharing my presentation, sharing my screen with you today as we talk about leadership load bearing walls. Again, if this is your first time joining us, let us know in the comments where you're joining us from. And if you are a returning guest in our space, also just tell us who you are in the comments as well. Leadership load bearing walls. That is the that is what we're going to be talking about today in our theme, and why mid-level managers are cracking and how to reinforce them. I'm still fixing my tech. But how do we reinforce our mid-level leaders? Why are they cracking? And they are, again, the load-bearing walls. And so let's think about your company in terms of a building structure, in terms of a building. Your mid-level managers are the load-bearing walls. They are the load-bearing walls in your organization. And so you see, in a building, load-bearing walls are essential to from preventing things from collapsing. So the load-bearing walls, they support both the foundation as well as the roof. And so they're in that middle capacity right there. And when you have a crack in your load-bearing wall, that is actually weakening your structure. And for those who are in construction, you will know what that looks like. And even if you're not in construction, when you have a crack in your load-bearing wall, it actually compromises your structure. And so your mid-level leaders, they are the backbone of your organization. They bridge the vision between the executives as well as the support team. So they are the bridge between the vision and the execution. So as executive, you have the vision. You get the vision from the board of directors. And then that vision is passed on to the mid-level leaders. And now the execution, they have to share in such a way what that vision is to the support team so that this vision can be executed. And so what happens is they absorb pressure from both top and bottom. They get the pressure. They are the pressure point. But here's what is I have gathered as I've done, some research and I've talked to HR directors, is that what is missing is the reinforcement. So instead of the mid-level managers receiving the support or receiving the reinforcement, they don't. So they are handed complexity with a smile, and they are expected to lead under the crack, under the pressure. And so we're going to explore why they crack under the pressure and how is it that we can reinforce them. And so what's missing? What's missing? So when they get the pressure, when they are handed the vision without any direction, and they are handed this without no reinforcement, without no support, here's what happened. I want to say that this is not development. This is actually not development. That is actually silent dysfunction. And that's leadership abandonment. And so, again, they are expected to lead and to do so well. They are expected to lead to do so without the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are missing. And what's the fundamentals that we're talking about here? We're talking about the right mindset and the visible support. That is what is missing for mid-level leaders, and so they crack under the pressure. You see, the top-down support of the vision, they support the vision that is given, and then they have to share how that is going to be executed. Your mid-level leaders, your new frontline leaders, they are the culture drivers. They drive the culture within the organization. They manage the complex team dynamics. And this is often done with the minimal training and the visible support that is actually needed. So here's something very profound that was shared. And so again, as we talk about that, here's something that was shared by Harvard. Here's something that was shared by Harvard Business Review. It says that senior executives know that middle managers resist change. Therefore, they only pretend to listen. And middle managers, in turn, learn that they won't be listened to. So they take on the role of the compliant child. And so that's a dysfunctional cycle, because executives pretend to listen. And so middle managers, they learn with compliance. They start to comply. They take on the role of a compliant child. And we know what that looks like. Even in our own household, if we go to that aspect where our children, they comply because we hear and we tell them children must be seen and not be heard. And it's the kind of same mentality when senior executives pretend to listen to your middle managers, and you're not really listening. What they do is they don't speak up. They don't share. And so the crack becomes wider. The crack becomes wider. And that is what often happens with that set of people, your middle managers. And so, if middle managers are expected to lead without ever being led well themselves, that's what, in essence, that they are being told. That's what they are being taught, right? They are being taught to lead without ever being led themselves. They're not lead. That's not leadership development. That is actually leadership abandonment. You're abandoning your leaders. And so they, as one person in the, as Dr. Marcia says, they, instead of they being instead of being competent, they are rewarded for compliance. And so we want to fix that. We want to fix that for our mid-level leaders. Because as we said, without, and here's what happens. Here's what happens when mid-level leaders crack. What happens when they crack? What happens when the crack starts to show up and the crack starts to get wider? Is that because they have little to no reinforcement, and they're not equipped with the right mindset and the right support, then the decisions that they make becomes reactive. Because of a lack of certainty about their abilities to lead, they become reactive rather than proactive. So because they think that they can't handle things, because of the compliance, because they've become a compliant child, or like a compliant child, they are uncertain as to how to handle things. And so things may spiral, things may start to spiral. And so again, instead of being proactive and nipping things in the bud, you see the crack, you see the airline crack, you see the airline fracture in the wall, deal with it. Get it fixed from early. Because if it's not fixed and pressure keeps being applied, it's going to get wider. It is going to get wider. The other thing that happens when they crack, or what cracks them, is that communication deteriorates and stress compounds silently. So you may not see the stress up front, but it is compounding silently. And so again, these were your best doers, and you promoted them to the new frontline managers, or they were promoted a few years back into mid-level managers. And so here's what happens. They know the informal structure or the informal network within your space. So they were your best doers. They did their work. They had it pat. They knew exactly what to do in their space and capacity. And so what is happening here is that because they have developed, they're in that space as doers, they know what is happening. They know who will do the work and who won't do the work. And so sometimes because they're in the support, because the mindset support is not there, because the visible support is not there, because they are straining, implementation stalls, and they are questioning if they are being heard effectively. And so they continue to crack under the pressure. The crack becomes wider, and because they're not being heard by the top and also by the support. They don't know that they're not getting the balance support that they need. The other thing that I've realized happens is that confidence crumbles. And so research shows that we have two coins to self confidence. That is general self confidence. I know that I will do a good job for which I'm qualified. You know you're qualified for the job and you know you can do it. And then there is the variable self confidence or the task specific self confidence. And so here is where they crumble, the task specific self confidence, because they're saying, you know what, I can help, but I am not good at. I can help, but I'm not good at. How many of us we have, we know that we're qualified for the job, but when we are placed in the position, we say, I can help, but I am not good at. And you can fill in the blanks of the things that you said that you're not good at. I know that when it comes on to being what you would say creative in this context, because we're all creatives, I want us to get that in our spirit. I want us to get that in our bones, that we're all creatives. We're all creatives, but we create in a different way. We like to think of creatives as being the persons who are artists, or the ones and we are talking about the different genres of artists here, not just one specific, but the different genres of artists. We think about those persons, that sector of persons as being creative. And you may not think of yourself as whether you're a coach or whether you are a leader, or you may say, I am not creative, but you are creative. You have a creative bone inside of you. We all have creativity within us. It just shows up differently. It just shows up differently. But in this case, where you have a task specific self confidence, because it is eroding in the capacity of your mid level leaders, it is eroding because they're saying, because again, they don't have the mindset, the right mindset to lead in that capacity. Then that task specific self confidence begins to erode and the crack becomes wider. It goes back to uncertainty in their abilities to lead. It goes back to their uncertainty in their ability to handle things. And so, again, because of that self confidence erosion, decisions become reactive instead of proactive. I want to pause and I want to welcome each and everyone who is joining us at this time. Welcome, welcome, Dr. Marcia. Welcome, Lisa. You are joining here live on LinkedIn. And for those who are joining live on YouTube as well, welcome. We're happy to have you here with us. Right, very much so, very much so. Our unique gifts and our creativity is divinely tied to our purpose, calling, our divine assignments. Absolutely, Dr. Marcia. Absolutely. They are tied to that. And so when we learn to develop our task specific confidence, self confidence, it actually helps us in whatever line we are going into. Whatever line we are going into. And so the other thing that happens when leaders crack is that fulfillment in their roles fade. So, again, they were your best doers. You promoted them. They were challenged in their capacity before they took on before you promoted them into this leadership capacity. They were doing well, they were getting the exceed expectations on their annual performance report. But no, they have been transitioned into this leadership role. And no, because they are uncertain about their abilities to lead, because communication is deteriorating and their confidence is crumbling. No, it is impacting the fulfillment of their role. The fulfillment of their role is actually fading. They're not enjoying the work anymore. Because again, it goes back to senior executives pretend to listen. And so, because they know that they're not being heard, they become like a compliant child. And so, yes, they become resistant to change. And so the strain continues and the cracks get even wider. They feel unheard and they resist the change. Not because they really want to resist the change, but because they are saying, I am not being heard, so why? And so the fulfillment in the role fades. They're not feeling that joy in their role anymore. And so this isn't just a workplace problem. I want us all to recognize that this is not just a workplace problem. When leaders crack, when leaders become more reactive in their decision, when communication starts to deteriorate, when their confidence starts to crumble, and when their fulfillment in their role starts to fade, it is not just a workplace problem. It actually becomes a life problem. Which is why in my MVP performance pillar, I don't talk about performance as a productivity act. A productivity act, HACK. It's not just a productivity, I don't talk about it as a productivity act. It is about a holistic, sustainable leadership approach. That's what it is. And so performance is more than hustle. Performance is not just about the hustle, it is about the whole person. So let's move on to the next segment of what we want to talk about today as we talk about leadership load bearing walls. Why and how to fix the cracks in our leadership, in our mid-level, specifically the mid-level leadership, because the mid-level leaders are the ones who hold up your proverbial building as it relates to your organization. So how to reinforce the walls? How do we reinforce the walls? Let me walk you through how we can reinforce the load bearing walls through performance, which is in that performance, we're going to be talking about intention, we're going to be talking about self-determination and accountability. Because this is where we are going to see the shift starts to happen. This is where we're going to see the shift starts to happen. And so the first thing in how we help to reinforce the cracks, reinforce the walls, is that we want to lead with intention. We want to lead with purpose. We talk about intention, and this is leading with purpose, not pressure. Because here's what happens as this proverb says, that when the roots are deep, there is no reason to fear the wind. There's no reason to fear the wind. And what does that mean? Because when your mid-level leaders are certain, when they're not micromanaging, and yes, Dr. Marcel, micromanagement, failure, and rejection. This uncertainty can come from personality trait, micromanagement, failure, and rejection. Absolutely, definitely agree with that. And so when they develop the certainty, when they develop intention, when they start reinforcing, when they start getting the reinforcement, they're going to be intentional. And that intention, they start leading with purpose, not just from purpose, but they start to lead with purpose. And so we don't want to confuse movement with progress, because not because we're moving means that we're making progress. Sometimes we're busy, but we're not making the progress because they are buried in the to-dos, and these to-dos are not aligned with why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you in your leadership role? And so if your mindset isn't right, your leadership won't be right. And so we want to think about leading with purpose. Why am I in this position as a leader? So I might not be getting the full support that I need, but let me step back and ask myself, what is my why as a leader in this capacity? It's not just to make a profit for the organization. It is more than that, because here's what happens. You start to lead from a place of goal orientedness, because that is intention. And the psychologists or the writers, Locke and Latham, emphasizes that goals that are specific and aligned with internal values improve performance outcomes. And so you want to ask yourself, what are my goals? What are my specific goals as a leader in this capacity? And when we do that, when you align your personal values, when you start to align that, when you start to get clarity, you're now start to able to make that impact. You start to drive impact, because again, remember that movement doesn't mean progress, because the wind will blow. The wind will blow. And when the wind blows, how deep are my roots in my own personal value systems? How deep are my roots when it comes on to my purpose? And so this is where intention becomes power. Intention is what stops leadership from becoming a checklist. It's not just a checklist that you go through every single day. When we develop the intention, when intention becomes power, it transforms your time to impact. And when a leader leads with clarity of purpose, you start to impact those around you. And this is for the senior executives, not just our mid-level managers, not just our frontline and mid-level managers who are cracking under the pressure. This is how you help them to reinforce. This is how you reinforce them. So this part that I'm talking about, to lead with purpose, lead with intention, is for my senior directors. This is where you come in. You start to lead with purpose so that your mid-level leaders can learn from you, and they will develop that intentionality as well. And so a checklist. You start to lead with clarity of purpose. So they don't just show up. As a leader, you don't just show up, you show up to transform. And so here's something that I myself have been learning and continues to learn and to apply, is that every time I'm stretching, and the more I stretch, the deeper my root will sink. And they also become stronger. And so, if any of you have ever witnessed a palm tree in a wind or in a storm, like I live in the tropics, I live in Jamaica, so I have gone through many, many, many hurricanes in my lifetime. And I have coconut trees. Some persons call them palm trees, but I have coconut trees. And I have witnessed where the hurricane, the wind is so strong in that hurricane that the coconut tree bows basically to the ground. And at the end of that storm, the coconut tree comes right back up and it is standing tall. And here's what I've learned happens during that process is that every time the wind blows that coconut or that palm tree and it bends over and it doesn't break, it is actually stretching the roots and the roots are getting strong. And that is what intention does for you as a leader. This is how intention becomes powerful for you as a leader, because it anchors your leadership even in chaos. It anchors your leadership even in chaos. The second point of how we can help our new frontline and mid-level leaders reinforce, you can reinforce them. How is it that you can reinforce them? Through self-determination. Allowing them to recognize that they have the power to choose again. You also have the power to choose again. And so performance begins with ownership. Ownership from the top, ownership from the middle, and ownership from the base. And when you make that mindset shift from I have to I get to, you come to realize that, oh, I'm not at the mercy of my environment. I have the power to reset, to redesign, and to re-engage. You start to develop power language. That's what you do here in self-determination. As you begin to reinforce your mid-level and your frontline leaders. And this opens up the door. This opens up the door, and you recognize that, again, you're not the victim of your role. You are absolutely not the victim of your role, but no, you are becoming the architect of the outcomes, of your outcomes. And now this piece is for the mid-level leaders. You are not the victim of your roles. You are the architect of your outcomes. You can get to choose the power shift from I have to I get to, from I'm stuck to I can choose again. And at this stage, you are owning your power again to choose again. You can decide. This is where you decide. This is where you get to decide what types of seeds you want to plant as a leader. What type of seeds do I want to plant? What types of seeds do I want to sow as part of my leadership garden as I continue to seek to grow in this space? What is that leadership garden? What does my leadership garden, what do I want it to look like? What structure, what kind of leadership house do I want to build? Do I want to build a leadership house that crumbles as the wind blows, it crumbles? Or do I want to build a leadership structure that is strong, that even in the midst of chaos, that even in the midst of when the storms come, change, because change is a constant. that when those happen, that we can stand up. We can stand up. Science also tells us that leaders with an internal locus of control, that is, leaders who have developed self determination, are more resilient and proactive. And that is what I call empowered leadership, not positional leadership, but it's personal. It is personal because you have developed this self determination. You have developed a mindset that I am not the victim of my role. I am the architect of the outcomes. I can build a leadership structure that is strong. And you get to choose. And so the question that I want you to ask yourself here is, what types of seeds do I want to sow? As as a senior executive, you want to ask yourself, what type of seeds do I want to sow? As a mid-level leader, you want to ask yourself, what types of seeds do I want to sow on my leadership journey? Because whatever seeds you sow will determine your leadership fruit. Whatever those seeds are, they will determine the leadership fruit. And if you build a weak structure, you're going to get weakness. Your building is going to sway. Every time that the wind blows, your building is going to sway. And eventually, because the cracks are getting wider and your building is being compromised, it's eventually going to crumble. Again, I want to pause and I want to welcome those who are just joining us. If you're just joining us on LinkedIn, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here with us this morning. I see Curtis is just joining us as well. There are some other notes in the chat. I will read those and connect with you afterwards. But thank you so very much for joining us this morning. We are talking about why mid-level leaders crack under pressure. We are talking about leadership load-bearing walls and how do we reinforce them? Why mid-level, how do we reinforce them so that they can become better at what they do? And I'm taking this from the perspective of performance in my framework, my MVP level framework. And so we have spoken a bit about the different aspects of why they crack, and now we're talking about how to reinforce them. And so we have talked about intention as a way of reinforcing them, and we have talked about self-determination. Now we're going to move on to accountability. Because here's what accountability does. Accountability stops the silence and it actually raises the standards. So leaders, let's really talk about this, because accountability in leadership isn't about micromanagement. It's not about micromanagement. It's about alignment. And I'll go back to a point here that Dr. Marcia made earlier in the comments. She said that when leaders are uncertain, it comes from personality traits, micromanagement, failure, and rejection. And so micromanagement comes from uncertainty. That's not accountability. Accountability is not micromanagement. True accountability is actually alignment. It is a system. Accountability is a system that keeps performance focused and values driven. And one of the things that I recognize And as I speak with, again, senior directors in human resource or operations, is that most people, most people, even in senior leadership or in mid level leadership, they see accountability as punishment. And even the base, even the support, they see accountability as punishment. And it shouldn't be. Because here's the thing, leaders, accountability is not about calling others out. It is not about calling others out. It is not just about calling others out. It is about calling yourself up. How do you call yourself up? How do you call yourself up? Through feedback loops. You create, you intentionally, again, because you're leading with purpose and you have developed self-determination, you are going to create feedback loops. So don't be afraid of the feedback. Don't be afraid as new frontline and mid-level leaders. Don't be afraid to seek feedback. I know sometimes we can think that it's an attack and it's not fair, but feedback can drastically increase our behavior change and goal achievement. What accountability does for us is that it should elevate us, not exhaust us. It should actually be a mirror that we grow from. So when we raise the standards of accountability, we get to build together. We get to stand on each other's shoulders as giants. That's what accountability does. It is not punishment. That's not what accountability is. It is a mirror for us to grow from. So again, call yourself up. Don't just call out other people. And so as we wrap up today, I hope something was said that would have triggered some thoughts and of introspection, both for senior executives, frontline and mid-level managers, as well as support teams. But here's how we're going to tie this together. As I shared earlier, when I talk about performance, I'm not talking about the productivity acts. I'm talking about persons being intentional, value driven. And here's what else science proves that when leaders take ownership of their goal and align their daily choices with deeper performance, outcome becomes even better. And the bottom line is leaders who are rooted in intention and self determination and accountability, they live better. And that is the real return on performance. So, again, it's not just a workplace problem, it becomes a life problem as well. And so, when you lead with intention, when you are self determined as a leader, when you develop that accountability, you build wealth. And the wealth is not just monetary, it's not just building wealth for the company. You're actually building a legacy of wealth for yourself. Because you, as the whole person, is growing and you are becoming, you're improving in how you make decisions. You are improving in your specific task self-confidence. And so as a whole, you are becoming better. And so here's a warning though. Here's a warning that I want to put out for all leaders. A lack of focus will bankrupt your vision and your leadership. So again, let's not confuse busy with productive, because we can have movement, but we may not have progress. So as we lead, let's focus on the intention, leading with purpose. Let's focus on the self-determination. Let's focus on the accountability. And when we do that, we will have wealth. We would have created wealth for ourselves and for our organizations. And so here's how we reinforce our leaders. Let us wrap this up and tell you again how you reinforce your leaders. So to my human resource directors, to my learning and development directors, to my operations directors, you are watching, you are listening, you're watching the replay, you're listening to this again. Your mid-level leaders, they carry the culture, but many of them are cracking silently. You don't fix this with another motivational talk. You fix it by giving your leaders a framework that reinforces them from the inside out. And that is what I offer through the third tier of my MVP program, Leadership Performance Reinforcement. Let's equip the people, or let's equip your people to build lasting impact without burning out or opting out. Because the ROI wealth is not just performance, but in the people who power your future. So if you are in that capacity as again, as a human resource director, operations director, or learning and development director, and you are ready to strengthen, the walls that hold your business together, DM me the word reinforcement, and let's talk. Let's talk about how this could look like, what this could look like inside your organization, so we can protect, multiply their performance. Again, in the performance, leadership performance, you build mindset, vision, and performance. So it's building a lasting impact without burnout or opt-out. Support your mid-level leaders who can carry your organizational culture. Equip leaders with a framework that reinforces them from the inside out. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Finding Freedom Through Confidence in our series, Leadership Unlock. I am your host, Tanique Easy, and I help organizations unlock the power of their new frontline and mid-level leaders with my proprietary MVP framework through coaching, speaking, and training. Again, thank you for joining us. I will see you on the next episode next week, Thursday. Join me live right here. Bye for now.